Johnny Carson wasn't just a late-night host. He was an American institution. For 3 decades, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was the place where stars were made, scandals were softened, and millions of viewers ended their day with a laugh. He was cool, calm, unshakable, the man who never seemed to lose control, no matter what chaos unfolded in front of him. But the truth, even Carson couldn't escape the unpredictability of live television. And sometimes, those unscripted moments were the very things that made him unforgettable. Think about it. 30 years on the air means 30 years of actors, singers, comedians, and Hollywood legends walking onto that stage. And when you put huge personalities like Robin Williams, Don Rickles, Frank Sinatra, Dolly Parton, and so many others in the same room as Carson, things didn't always go according to plan. In fact, that's exactly when the magic happened. Sometimes Carson was left in tears, real, unguarded emotion that shocked his audience. Other times he was left in fits of uncontrollable laughter, unable to speak as the cameras kept rolling. And then there were the moments where he said something so bold, so unexpected, that viewers sent floods of letters to NBC demanding answers. What makes these clips so special isn't just that they're funny or shocking. It's that they revealed sides of Carson the world rarely got to see. Behind the smooth professional mask was a man who could be caught off guard, embarrassed, vulnerable, and even overwhelmed. And instead of ruining his reputation, those moments only made him more loved. Today, we're looking back at 10 of the most insane, unforgettable Carson moments. The ones that broke through his polished late-night persona and showed us the raw, unpredictable, and sometimes chaotic king of late night. When Robin Williams sat down across from Johnny Carson, everyone in the studio knew the normal rules of late-night television were about to be thrown out the window. Most guests followed Johnny's lead, answering questions, cracking a few jokes, and promoting their latest project. But Robin? He didn't play by anyone's script. The second he hit that stage, the energy in the room shifted. Instead of settling into polite conversation, Robin exploded into impressions, leaping from his chair, turning Carson's desk into his own personal stage. He was a whirlwind, doing voices, physical comedy, and skits that nobody could have predicted. The producers in the control room were in a panic. They were used to structure, timing, and knowing when to cut to commercial. But Robin's chaotic genius didn't leave space for that. He was pure improvisation, unstoppable, unpredictable, and completely electric. And here's what makes this moment so special. Carson, the man known for always being in control, didn't even try to reel Robin in. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, wiped tears of laughter from his eyes, and let Robin completely take over The Tonight Show. For a man who built his reputation on being the conductor of late-night TV, this was one of the rare times he was happy to just sit back and enjoy the ride. Carson later admitted that Robin Williams was one of the only guests who could genuinely surprise him, the only person who could make Johnny feel like a member of the audience again. And that's exactly why these appearances became legendary. With Robin on stage, no one, not the producers, not Johnny, not even Robin himself, knew what was coming next. And that unpredictability is what made live television so thrilling. Johnny Carson was famously meticulous about his Tonight Show desk. Every item had its place, from the pencils he liked to drum with to a wooden cigarette box that wasn't just a prop, but one of Johnny's personal treasures. Guests could joke around, but the desk itself, that was sacred ground. So when Don Rickles, the king of insults, guest hosted The Tonight Show in 1973 and accidentally broke that prized cigarette box, he knew he was in trouble. Rickles wasn't afraid to poke fun at anyone, but damaging Johnny's set was another story. The very next night, when Carson returned, he brought up the broken box on air, showing the audience the damage with a look of mock outrage. The crowd laughed, but you could tell Carson wasn't going to let this one slide, and he didn't. Months later, during a live taping of Rickles' sitcom CPO Sharky, Carson did something completely unplanned. With cameras rolling, he barged onto Rickles' set in the middle of a scene, cigarette box in hand, demanding answers. Rickles, dressed in his full Navy uniform for the show, was caught completely off guard. The sitcom audience had no idea what was happening. Was this part of the script? Was Carson really this mad? Rickles, for once, looked speechless, fumbling for excuses as Carson scolded him in front of everyone. "You broke my cigarette box," Carson barked, while the crowd roared with laughter. What made this moment unforgettable wasn't just the chaos, but the friendship behind it. Carson wouldn't have pulled a stunt like that with just anyone. His surprise ambush showed how much he trusted Rickles, and how much fun he had, letting their playful rivalry spill over into live television. The cigarette box incident became a Tonight Show classic, replayed for years, and it perfectly captured the magic of Carson and Rickles, two legends, constantly pushing each other and never missing the chance to turn a mishap into comedy gold. Not every unforgettable moment on The Tonight Show came from chaos or comedy. Sometimes, it was raw emotion that caught Johnny Carson and his audience completely off guard. In 1981, Hollywood legend Jimmy Stewart, known for his gentle voice and classic roles, joined Johnny on the couch. The interview started off lighthearted, the way these conversations usually did. But then Stewart mentioned he had written a poem about his dog, Bo, who had recently passed away. Carson, expecting something playful or sweet, encouraged him to read it. What followed silenced the entire studio. Stewart began softly, describing Bo's loyalty and quirks, but as the lines went on, the poem revealed a deeper sense of love and loss. His voice cracked slightly as he read the closing lines, confessing how much he missed reaching down at night to stroke his dog's hair. Only to remember Bo was gone, the audience held their breath. And for once, Johnny Carson, the man who could always find the perfect quip, didn't even try. The camera caught him visibly emotional, his eyes glistening as he listened. For someone as famously guarded as Carson, it was a moment of pure, unfiltered humanity. A Tonight Show director later admitted Johnny wasn't performing for the camera. He was just a man, sitting there, touched to his core. He didn't hide it, didn't deflect with a joke. He let the moment be. That night wasn't about punchlines. It was about connection. Two American icons, Stewart sharing his grief and Carson letting himself feel it alongside him. It was proof that late night didn't just have to be laughs. It could also capture the truth of being human. And for many fans, that was one of the most unforgettable Carson moments of all time. When Frank Sinatra walked onto The Tonight Show in 1976, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. Sinatra wasn't just a guest. He was an icon, the kind of larger-than-life figure people didn't usually joke about. His reputation for power, influence, and a fiery temper made most comedians tread carefully around him. But Don Rickles wasn't most comedians. Sitting next to Carson and Sinatra, Rickles launched into one of his signature roasts, treating the legendary singer like any other target. "Look at him," Rickles said, gesturing at Sinatra. "He comes on, everyone thinks he's wonderful. Let me tell you something. This man is overrated." The audience gasped, then erupted into nervous laughter. Carson, caught in the middle, looked uneasy. He had seen Sinatra's temper firsthand over the years, and even he wasn't sure how Frank would react to being mocked on live television. For a few tense moments, the question hung in the air. Would Sinatra laugh, or would things take a very different turn? Rickles, never one to back down, leaned in even further. At one point, he grabbed Sinatra's knee and added, "Frank, you know I love you. Can I get a ride home?" And then it happened. Sinatra burst out laughing. Genuine hearty laughter that instantly broke the tension. The relief in the studio was palpable. Carson, grinning now, leaned back in his chair, letting out the nervous energy he'd been holding in. That moment wasn't just comedy. It was cultural. It showed Sinatra, the untouchable legend, letting his guard down and taking a joke like anyone else. And it showed Rickles' fearless genius, walking a razor's edge between disaster and brilliance. Later, Carson admitted that what Rickles did that night took guts. Because on live TV, mocking Frank Sinatra wasn't just a joke. it was a gamble. And Rickles won big. By the 1980s, Bob Hope was a living legend. He had dominated American entertainment for decades, from vaudeville and radio to movies and USO tours. His appearances on The Tonight Show were supposed to be a celebration of his legacy. But as the years went on, those appearances became uncomfortable. Hope was well into his 70s and 80s when he kept coming back to Carson's stage. And instead of sharp, fresh material, he leaned on cue cards and recycled one-liners. The same golf jokes, the same political jabs that audiences had heard 1,000 times before. The problem was, comedy had changed. What once killed in the 50s didn't always land in the 80s. And sitting next to him was Johnny Carson, a master of timing, a man who could read a room instantly. Carson respected Hope deeply, but he also knew when jokes weren't connecting. During one particularly painful segment, Hope plowed through a set of jokes, barely acknowledging the muted reaction from the crowd. Carson forced polite laughter, loosening his tie, and glancing at his sidekick Ed McMahon, his silent signal that things weren't going well. But Johnny was too professional to ever let his true feelings show on air. Backstage, though, it was different. After one of Hope's later appearances, Carson reportedly muttered, "Hope doesn't listen. He just talks." It was a rare moment of blunt honesty about someone Carson admired, but also struggled to host. What made these moments so striking wasn't just the awkwardness. It was the contrast. Bob Hope, once the sharpest comedian in America, now struggling to connect. And Carson, the man who always knew how to rescue a moment, sitting there quietly, carrying the weight of it. For many, watching Hope on The Tonight Show in those final years was bittersweet. It was a reminder that even legends can fade, and that late night, for all its laughter, sometimes revealed the harsher truth about show business. If there was one kind of segment that always kept Carson on edge, it was the animal guests, exotic animals, unpredictable behavior, and a live audience. That was a recipe for chaos. And in 1979, chaos literally landed on his head. Animal handler Joanne Steele brought out a capuchin monkey to introduce to Carson. At first, everything seemed normal. The monkey perched calmly, while Steele explained its habits. Johnny, sitting there with his famous composure, nodded politely and cracked a few small jokes. And then, without warning, the monkey launched itself straight onto Carson's perfectly styled hair. The studio erupted. For decades, Johnny's slick hair had been untouchable, part of his on-screen persona. Seeing it instantly turned into a jungle gym by a hyper little monkey was comedy gold. Carson froze, wide-eyed, as the animal scrambled around on his head, tugging and pulling at strands. What made the moment so funny wasn't just the monkey's antics, it was Carson's reaction. Instead of panicking or calling for help, he sat completely still, his face locked in that classic deadpan expression, as if silently telling the audience, "Can you believe this is happening?" By the time the handler managed to retrieve the monkey, Carson's hair was sticking up in all directions. He looked directly into the camera and delivered the perfect punchline. "And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I prefer cats." The audience roared. That was Johnny at his best, turning what could have been a disaster into pure entertainment. His ability to stay calm, find the humor, and embrace the absurdity is exactly why moments like this became instant classics. By the mid-1970s, Dolly Parton was already a star, not just for her powerhouse voice and songwriting, but for her larger-than-life personality. She was quick-witted, charming, and always willing to laugh at herself. That made her the perfect guest for The Tonight Show. But in 1977, one exchange with Johnny Carson became one of the most talked-about moments in the show's entire history. As they settled into playful banter, Carson leaned over, glanced at Dolly's famously low-cut outfit, and made a comment that stunned the audience. With a mischievous grin, he said, "I'd give a year of my life to peek under that blouse." For a split second, the studio fell silent. Then came a mix of gasps and laughter. It wasn't the kind of thing viewers were used to hearing on television at the time, even from Johnny. Dolly, true to form, handled it with grace. Instead of looking uncomfortable, she laughed it off, cracking jokes and moving the conversation forward with that southern charm that had won over millions. She later admitted she wasn't offended, choosing to take it as a compliment. But viewers had plenty to say. NBC was flooded with letters, some praising Carson's boldness, others calling it completely inappropriate. It sparked one of the biggest controversies of Carson's career, and yet the moment lived on. For many, it showed a different side of Johnny, a rare lapse in his usually careful, gentlemanly on-screen persona. It also highlighted Dolly's ability to rise above the awkwardness and keep the audience laughing with her, not at her. Looking back, it's a moment that probably wouldn't make it on air today. But in 1977, it became one of the most unforgettable clips of The Tonight Show. Proof that even Johnny Carson, master of timing, sometimes crossed the line. By May of 1992, Johnny Carson was preparing to say goodbye. After 3 decades of hosting The Tonight Show, his final weeks were filled with nostalgia, laughter, and star-studded farewells. But no one could have predicted that one guest would move him to tears in front of millions. Bette Midler joined Carson for one of his very last episodes, alongside Robin Williams. The night started the way fans expected: funny stories, playful banter, and Johnny doing what he did best. But then, near the end of the show, Bette shifted the mood. She announced she wanted to sing something special just for Johnny. Then, with the studio silent, she began performing One for My Baby and One More for the Road, a classic ballad about last calls and final goodbyes. As she sang directly to him, the camera cut to Carson. The king of late night, the man who rarely showed emotion, sat quietly, his eyes welling with tears. He didn't try to hide it, didn't break the tension with a joke. He just let the moment wash over him. When Midler finished, the audience gave a standing ovation. Carson leaned forward, kissed her hand gently, and whispered the words that summed up everything. "I can't top that." It was rare, almost unheard of, for Carson to reveal that much vulnerability on air. For 30 years, he had kept a distance, always polished, always professional. But in that moment, he let the walls drop. People who worked on the show later said you could feel the weight of history in the room. Everyone knew they weren't just watching another Tonight Show performance, they were witnessing the end of an era. For many fans, this wasn't just one of Carson's most emotional moments, it was the most authentic. And that's exactly why it's still remembered today. Animal expert Joan Embury was a regular guest on The Tonight Show, and every time she walked on stage with an exotic animal, you could feel Johnny brace himself. He loved the comedy that came from these unpredictable encounters. But he wasn't exactly thrilled about sharing his desk with wild creatures. One night in the late 1970s, Embury brought along a massive Burmese python. At first, everything seemed under control. The snake coiled calmly across her arms as she explained its size, weight, and habits. Johnny leaned back in his chair, cracking the occasional joke while keeping a cautious eye on the reptile. And then, without warning, the python started slithering off the desk and straight toward Carson. The moment Johnny realized it was headed in his direction, his composure evaporated. He leapt out of his chair in a flash, practically stumbling backward as the audience roared with laughter. This wasn't the cool, collected Carson they were used to. This was pure fight-or-flight instinct, caught live on national television. The snake was eventually wrangled back under control, but the damage, or rather the comedy, was already done. Straightening his tie and regaining just enough composure to face the crowd, Carson delivered the perfect punchline. "Somebody better check my pants." The audience erupted again. That was the magic of Johnny Carson. He wasn't afraid to be the butt of the joke when the moment called for it. Instead of hiding his fear, he leaned into it, turning a terrifying situation into one of The Tonight Show's most requested clips. It was the kind of moment you couldn't script, and the kind of comedy only Johnny could deliver. By the mid-1980s, Arnold Schwarzenegger was transitioning from bodybuilding champion to Hollywood action star. His larger-than-life personality made him a natural fit for The Tonight Show, but what he did one night completely threw Johnny Carson off balance. Carson started with the usual question, expecting Arnold to promote his latest movie. Instead, Arnold leaned forward and launched into a long, serious answer, entirely in German. Carson froze. He didn't understand a word, and neither did most of the audience. For a moment, the studio sat in stunned silence. But instead of panicking, Carson did what he did best. He turned it into comedy. With a straight face, he began nodding along as if he understood perfectly. Every so often, he tossed in nonsense words that sounded vaguely German. Ja, wunderbar, Schnitzel. The audience caught on, laughing harder each time Carson pretended to follow along. Finally, after dragging out the bit for several minutes, Arnold broke into laughter and switched back to English, confessing he had always wanted to see how Johnny would react. What made the moment so memorable wasn't just the prank. It was how Carson handled it. Plenty of hosts would have shut the joke down or gotten flustered. But Johnny leaned into the absurdity, happily making himself part of Arnold's gag. It was the perfect example of Carson's genius. He didn't need to be in control to be funny. In fact, sometimes the funniest moments came when he gave up control entirely. And that's why this prank is remembered as one of the best, unscripted Tonight Show moments of all time. Johnny Carson's 30-year reign wasn't defined by the jokes he prepared in advance. It was defined by how he handled the unpredictable. Whether it was Robin Williams turning the set into his personal playground, Don Rickles pushing boundaries with Sinatra, Dolly Parton sparking controversy, or Bette Midler moving him to tears, the moments no one could script became the ones fans never forgot. That was Carson's true legacy. He didn't just host late night, he embraced the chaos of it. And in doing so, he reminded us why live television can feel so electric, even decades later. So, which of these moments shocked you the most? Was it Robin's wild energy, Dolly's infamous exchange, or Carson wiping away tears during his farewell? Let us know what you think in the comments below.